G'day guys, and welcome back to our Kart Class Podcast. Today we're looking at how to adjust your tyre pressures. Now, when it comes to racing, we want 4 balanced tyres. If we've got tyres that are too low in the pressures, it could constantly slide, and we're never going to achieve that ultimate grip. So the kids or the drivers who are out on track, they're sliding constantly, and that's not going to give them much confidence as well. On the other end of the spectrum, if we're running tyre pressures that are too high, we tend to see karts that initially quite fast, but then they lose stability and grip once the tyres overheat. And again, we're going to start to lose performance as the race or the session goes on. So when it comes to adjusting your tyre pressures, the first thing we want to do is we want to know the optimal window that these tyre pressures are going to work in. Now, that's going to change from different tyre manufacturers, depending on whether you're on a soft tyre, or a harder compound tyre that's more longer lasting. Ideally, when your hot pressures are coming off the track, so that means you've done your session, whether that's practice, qualifying, or a race, once you've finished, you're trying to find that your tyre pressures are increasing by between 2 to 3 psi as a maximum. If they're not increasing that much, I would tend to start on a higher pressure. So if you're finding that you've set your pressures at, let's just say 12 psi, they've come in at 13, then maybe for the next session, I'd probably start them at a little bit higher of a pressure range so they can increase a bit higher and get in that optimal window. If they're increasing any more than 3 psi, then again, that's probably too much. So I would start to lower the starting pressure by between 0.5 or even 1 psi, but that's on the higher end, going 1 psi per tyre. Now, try and do some research on your tyre compound to see where that optimal window is. Now, let's say for a Max's Cadet tyre, we might aim for 15 psi when they finish off the track. Now, that means if we're starting around 12.5 to 13 psi, again, looking towards that 2 to 2.5 psi increase for the session, then they're going to be looking at coming in around 15 psi. If they start to increase more than 15 psi, and that could be that one tyre's gone up more than the other, then we tend to just lower that hot pressure down to 15, wait for them to cool down, and then we know our new starting pressure for the following session. Now, like I said, from a harder compound tyre, you can tend to start at a higher pressure range, and for our softer compound tyres, a lower pressure might be around that sort of 8 to 9 psi to get into that optimal window. So it really does depend on your tyre compound and obviously how long the session is. If you've got an 8-lap session, you might run the PSI one more compared to, say, a 15 or an 18-lap final. You might have to lower the starting pressure by 1 psi or even half a psi to get to that optimal window once again. Now, when it comes to the track direction, that's going to play a big factor as well. So we're going to look at whether we're going anti-clockwise or clockwise, and depending on which direction we are driving, the outside rear tyre will do the most work, and then the inside front will do the least amount of work. So we sort of offset the starting pressure of those two tyres to sort of determine how many left and rights there are to how much load that tyre is going to need. So we might start on, again, working off those Max's tyres, we might start on 12 psi in the outside rear tyre. We might go 12.5 psi for the outside front. Might even start at 13 psi, so it's a 1 psi difference between the front to back, and then 12.5 on the opposite rear tyre as well. Again, once we come in 15 psi, that's the optimal range. So the next thing we want to try and look at is the track surface. If you've got a smooth surface, that tends to put a lot less heat into the tyres. So again, your starting pressure could be a little bit higher, maybe 1 psi, depending on the track conditions. If it's dusty, it could be 2 psi higher than normal. If it's a course circuit, we tend to run at a lower pressure because it's very rocky, a course circuit. So when it's more exposed rock, as you're cornering at higher speeds, that's going to, like a cheese grater, it's going to work the tyre a lot harder. So if they're working the tyres harder, you want to lower the starting tyre pressure. So there's a lot of factors that come into adjusting your tyre pressures. It's not sort of a set the tyres at 12, set and forget, any track, any conditions, any track direction. There's a lot that goes into it. If you want to become a little bit, more wise with the pressures, I would really recommend getting a digital tyre pressure gauge. Now that can get you those 0.1 or even those 0.3 increments. That's a lot better for fine tuning. Now, if you're racing club days and you're 1 second off the pace, probably not necessary. But the tyre pressure gauge is probably one of those things that once you invest in once, you sort of keep that. Like I've got my Alfano tyre pressure gauge and I've had it for about 7 years. So it's an initial outlay. But like I said, from now, I've kept that pressure gauge for so long and I've used it for years on end. And it really gets it precise. And that's going to help you with that longevity of a session to make sure that you're in that optimal window. So there's sort of the key things to look at when you're trying to adjust your tyre pressures. Really see what works for your driver and also for the wheels and the rims that you're using. If you're using a magnesium rim, they're going to increase a lot slower because the magnesium component, the material that it's made out of, is trying to disperse the heat compared to an alloy wheel. That's going to try and retain the heat, so better for cooler conditions. But that's okay. You can sort of set your tyre pressures accordingly depending on what wheel you're using. Is it a low volume wheel which has got more spokes in it? Again, that's trying to release some of that hot air out of the tyres and that temperature compared to a solid wheel which has basically got no spokes, just the stud pattern. So it's like I said, it's a lot to factor in when it comes to tyre pressures to make sure that you're giving yourself or your son or daughter the best possible chance when it comes to that kart performance. Over the last 6 months, we've been trying to work on a tyre pressure calculator. Now that's trying to factor in track surfaces, track configurations, tyre compounds, distance of the races, how rubbly the track is. And so we've set these parameters up with different wheels and different setup adjustments that it's going to sort of spit out an answer for you to start off. And it should get you pretty close to where you want to start those pressures. Now, it's not perfect and it takes a lot of testing and a lot of fine tuning, but I think I've sort of input all the key numbers that we want to hit. And then depending on the track temperature, the ambient temperature, like I said, the race distance and your tyre quality, whether it's a used tyre compared to a new tyre, we're trying to throw in all of these factors so that when you go to the track, it automatically picks up the weather. You type in the distance of your session, whether it's a practice session, a race, or a qualifying session, and the state of your tyres and the setup, and then it will spit out to run 12, 12.5, 13, 12.6, or whatever it is. It's going to get you as close as you can to that hot pressure optimal window. So hopefully by, I think it's about 2 weeks away, I will be releasing the tyre pressure calculator, which if it's not perfect, it should get you very close to that window that you want to set up the tyres in. And now it doesn't also just factor in for the Australian compound tyres. We've got MG to suit the New Zealand and the USA market. We've got Shinko as well, which is based in the USA from a couple of series. We've got Mojo, which is going to suit the European market or some other countries that use the Mojo tyres in Asia. So again, it's the constant feedback of this is what's working, this is what isn't working, and then we'll sort of, fine tune our parameters and our algorithms to sort of better tune your tyre pressure calculator as well. So any feedback along the way, once we jump on board, that tool is, happy to hear it. We really want to fine tune it so it makes it a lot easier for not just newcomers, but also people that want to go and win national races. Like we were using this at our last round of the AKC. I was typing in the numbers of what we were trying to reach, and they were pretty close. They're within that 0.3 to 0.5 per tyre. So not too far out of the window, and we're testing that in real life conditions as well. So hopefully I can help, the karting community out a lot more moving forward with all these new tools we have coming out through Kart Class. So hopefully that episode has given you a bit more of an idea on, it's not so much a set and forget. It does, factor into surface, track configuration, the tyre quality, the track, like I said, conditions, duration, and setting each individual tyre accordingly to suit. So you come in with, a really well-balanced kart so that your son or daughter, or again, yourself who's driving the kart, can feel confident for the duration of the race. That's it for this episode on our Kart Class podcast. I've been receiving some really good feedback from people that have been, bumping into at kart tracks or at the AKC on the weekend from people who have tuned in, which is really nice. I appreciate the feedback as well. So if you've got any questions or a topic that you'd really like answered in more depth, then feel free to shoot a message through on our Kart Class socials or my Dave Sera Facebook. I'll be happy to help you guys out. Until next time, guys, I appreciate you listening in. Cheers.